Welcome to today's webinar, Beat the Heat and Keep Cool Outdoors. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Stacy with the Risk Management Department at ICW Group. I'm also your host for the next hour. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping notes. All participants will be placed in listen-only mode. In your webinar panel, you will see a pod labeled Questions. You may type your questions in at any time during the presentation. All the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. I would now like to introduce our presenter. He joined ICW in September of 2013 as a senior risk management consultant. Prior to joining ICW, he worked for Western Growers, an agricultural industry member service organization that provides insurance services such as employee training and industry advocacy for their members. Prior to working for Western Growers, he worked for two other workers' compensation insurance carriers, Crum and Forrester and the California State Compensation Insurance Fund, where he worked in loss control for 23 years. I'd like to present to you Senior Risk Management Consultant Jose Gutierrez.
Well, welcome everybody. Good morning and good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak with you this morning and afternoon. I hope everybody's is well, and I'm so thankful for your presence and for your interest in this topic. So let's get going, and we'll just kind of just talk about some items that we need to make sure that we cover. What is it that you'll learn? You're probably asking yourself, what is it that I'm going to get out of this particular webinar? And here's my hope and my goal is that you increase your awareness of heat illness so that all of us, we all need to be reminded from time to time. We know things, but sometimes we forget them in the daily course of life. And so all of a sudden it's going to start getting hot again. So we need to start thinking about, hey, let's increase our awareness. Some things that we can do to prevent heat illness among our workforce, our employees, and some tips, some actionable tips, some things we can do to try to make our work environment as safe as possible. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about the regulatory language, some things that we're mandated to do as employers and supervisors. So that's what my goal is. That's what I'm hoping that our takeaway is. The agenda, we're going to talk about what is outdoor heat illness. We'll talk about that to a large extent. We're also going to cover the regulations, some consequences of not complying with the regulations, something that I know all of you that are listening in would never do, because that's why you're listening in. You want to make sure that you're compliant. So thank you so very much for caring about your employees and about providing a safe work environment. The best part of this presentation, I would say, are the 10 steps to beat out the heat outdoors. And you can put me / indoors as well, because we'll cover a little bit of that as well. What to do in high heat conditions, situations, and I'm also going to mention some helpful resources. And at the very end, we'll have an opportunity for, if there's something I forgot to cover, or we need to clarify, or we need to have a dialogue about, we'll have a question and answer session at the very end. So I thank you for that. Okay, so heat illness can be deadly. That's one of the things that we have to keep in mind. In 2014 alone, 2,630 workers suffered from heat illness, and 18 died from heat stroke. And the thing I want to point out, causes on the job, that's 2,630 workers that were admitted into the hospital. That's not to mention the even greater number, that's just the tip of the iceberg, the even greater number of people that were sick on the job, or had to go home, or were treated and then released. So again, the sad thing is that heat illness and deaths are preventable. And this is some information provided by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So heat illness is preventable, and that's one of the things that's why we're having this discussion, this dialogue this morning. Looking at the history of heat related deaths, heat stroke and illnesses in the United States. If you look at this chart that we have in front of us, in 1980 we had approximately 2.8 persons per million that died or were seriously ill from heat stroke, and then those are for a pretty high number. And that's when back in those days they didn't have a whole lot of regulations going on in terms of addressing specifically heat illness. In 1995, the numbers had dropped to probably some education, 1.4, but then we saw that in the year 2000 it started shooting up, and so the graph shows that in the year 2000 it shot up to 3.6 persons per million. So that given across the board, more deaths were occurring. In 2005, they saw the drop down again, and then you can see between 2005 and 2010, with the implementation of some regulations, we did see a drop off. But once again, 2011, 2012, you know how it is, we start to comply, and then we pay attention to stuff, and after a while, we start to slack off a little bit. And you can see that throughout the course of the history of the heat illnesses in the U.S. that, you know, by 2010, the numbers had shot up again. But, you know, these regulations, the bottom line is these regulations are working, and it is good that most employers are caring about this particular topic. So let's talk about this. What is outdoor heat illness? What specifically is it that we're talking about? Well, we all know that the excessive sweating, and we all perspire, leads to dehydration. The physiological response to heat, our body responses to heat. We all know that. We're out in the heat, and all of a sudden our body starts to react. The body loses its ability to cool off as we start perspiring. You know, if we don't hydrate ourselves, we lose that ability. So the body begins its ability to cool. Increased blood flow to the skin causes decrease in organ function. What does that mean? Well, basically, the way I explain it to workers in real simple terms is that, you know, as we start to perspire and we start to cool, as we heat, our body heats up, our blood system needs to cool. And what happens is our heart has to do what? Has to pump that much harder, you know, to get those nutrients and that hydration to the body, and that causes a decrease in organ functions. As your as your pressure goes up, pulse rate goes up, causes a decrease in organ function, right? Which can lead to what? Heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and the more severe heat stroke. So it's some steps that occur, and we need to recognize them, that we can't be in denial about the effects of heat on our body. That's the bottom line. So heat stress itself, what is it? Excessive loss of electrolytes, which causes some of the initial warning signs are painful cramps and early warning signs. So I'd like you for just step back for just a second. There are initial symptoms of heat illness, and then there are emergency symptoms. So here we're talking about the initial symptoms, painful cramps and early warning signs, are early warning signs. So that's usually something that happens. We start to lose electrolytes, we start to perspire a lot. If we're not rehydrating, after a while we start to have cramps, usually in the legs or abdomen. What should you do? Stop the activity, hydrate, rest in a cool place. You know, so that's one of the things that as a basic number 101, some things that we want to make sure that we get done. Now, if the condition persists, then we get medical attention if the condition continues. So those are heat stress, excessive loss of electrolytes, heat exhaustion. Now we're getting into where it's getting a more serious condition. Water depletion, excessive thirst, weakness, headaches, loss of consciousness. Now we're talking about an emergency situation. Salt depletion, nausea, vomiting, muscle cramps, dizziness. Again, these are all symptoms that can occur with initial heat illness and the more emergency conditions. So what should we do? Stop the activity and seek treatment immediately. That's exactly what we want to take away. Some additional things: heat stroke. Again, the more emergency situation. What happens is our body's amazing. You know, if we start to perspire a lot and we start to lose electrolytes, after a while the body knows that it needs a minimal amount of liquids or fluids to function. And if we're not rehydrating, what does it do? It tries to maintain that liquid, and the cooling system for the body shuts down. We stop perspiring, and on the surface you'd say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that internally your body starts getting hot inside. You know, this can cause or can kill or cause brain damage. And in particular, and I can say this because you know, I've been around I'm a card-carrying member of AARP. I like to tease people, but I'm over 50 years of age, and yeah, I'm more susceptible now to heat illness than I was when I was in my 20s, and I just have to acknowledge that. So heat stroke targets people over 50. Absolutely. Young athletes that, you know, maybe have not been used to being out in the heat. The obese, again, there's those extra pounds. They add a little bit more extra weight to a little bit more extra work for us, for our body. And then the disabled, you know, again, situations are, you know, a lot of times people with the physical, how shall I say, mental the delays may not understand the effects of the heat on their body, and they may just be out there enjoying themselves and having fun, but they're more susceptible to heat stroke because they're not going to be as attentive to drinking water and staying hydrated. So again, there's a certain classification of people in the population that are more susceptible, and those over 50, young athletes, obese people or people with a few pounds extra, and again, the disabled. So those are the people that we really want to pay extra attention to. Know the difference. Here's our chart right here. So this is a really awesome, nice tool that's available on the ICW website. And for those of you well, I'm sure everybody can get access to this information. Just request it of us, and we'll forward it to you. But this is a good basic tool that we like to use, and I want to point it out to you. On the left-hand side, it has heat exhaustion, which is your initial symptoms. On the right-hand side, it has your heat stroke. So faint or feeling dizzy, that's one of the initial symptoms. You know, you're out in the sun, you've been working hard, and all of a sudden you get up and you're feeling like, wow, what's going on here? Faint or dizziness, that's something we need to start paying attention to. If it turns into a throbbing headache, now we're talking about heat stroke, and it's something that's serious. Excessive sweating. Well, we all perspire. We all do. We all sweat. But when we're perspiring too much, that means, hey, maybe we're getting all the electrolytes that our body needs. We need to stay hydrated. Excessive sweating, that lets us know that our body's under stress. When the body goes into the no sweating situation, that means that it's trying to maintain liquids. That's heat stroke. That's something different. That's where that internal heat of your body starts to build up. Heat exhaustion. You might feel cool, pale, clammy skin, where the body's trying to cool itself off. On the heat, and that's going to be your initial symptoms. On the heat stroke side, body temperature about above 130 degrees. Red hot, dry skin. Again, that's something that's a serious situation. You touch the person, or they just look red and really hot. Both conditions can cause nausea or vomiting. On the left-hand side, we have a rapid, weak pulse, because the heart's working hard. And then all of a sudden, on the heat stroke side, now the heart's really trying to get those liquids out there and cool down. Rapid, strong pulse. So again, those are both symptoms. Once that pulse starts to go up, it's time to get out of there and to cool off. Muscle cramps, those are initial symptoms. The more serious heat stroke, may lose consciousness. Now we know, boy, that's a serious situation. So what can we do? Well, number one, get to a cooler. Doesn't have to necessarily be air conditioned. And air conditioned be okay, but to get to a cooler place, cool people off. Sip water if the person is conscious, and then take a cool shower or use cold compresses to cool your body down. But more importantly, stop what you're doing, get in out of the heat, get into some shade, and rest. Lie down and loosen your clothing. So again, know the difference between the initial symptoms and then emergency symptoms. That's the whole point of this little section I wanted to cover with you. Regulations and consequences, some things that we want to think about right here. What we have to do to comply with the laws. Responsibilities. What is it that we have? Well, all employers have the responsibility. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I know that if you're listening in on this webinar, it's because you care about your work environment and your employees. So thank you so very much for listening in to me. Responsibilities. We all have, all employers have a responsibility. In a lot of places they call the general duty clause. In California in particular, we have the Injury and Illness Prevention Program that requires a safe workplace free from serious hazards. So heat and hot weather is a serious hazard, believe it. So we have the responsibility to provide a workplace free from serious hazards. We need to examine our workplace conditions, do a walkthrough, making sure that there's, that there are areas where we're working, our employees are working at, are cool as we can, making it or not. If it's outdoor situation, then we need to provide shade and water. We need to provide establish and communicate procedures with employees to make sure that they know what to do, And then lastly, we need to ensure employees follow safe and healthful work requirements. So those are the basic responsibilities that all state OSHA programs and the federal OSHA requires of employers. Provide safety training. What else should we do? Provide training. Provide training to our employees in a language and vocabulary workers understand. Absolutely. We don't want to complicate matters. I always like to break things down. I like to sometimes even say to myself, I want to make it to a child could understand what I'm saying. I want to keep it as basic as I can. And so, yeah, that's one of the, provide training in language and a vocabulary the employees understand. And the most important part of this responsibility is to have an injury and illness prevention program, but one that's not just sitting on a shelf, one that's actually a living document, something that's our map, our guideline. It tells us how we're going to implement safety in our place of employment, and it's really something that we live. We don't just talk it, we live it. So preventing heat illness and keeping employees safe is your responsibility. Absolutely, and I think everybody recognizes that. When the outdoor temperature exceeds consequences, when outdoor temperature exceeds 80 degrees, if any of the following elements are not present, okay, you could face a serious citation. You want to make sure that you train employees, and that's why the website on our resources that we have available, there's some good tools in there for you to provide training to not only your employees but as well as your supervisors. And this webinar is going to be available on our website later on, I think next week at some point, and that's a good tool that you can use to provide training to your supervisors. Just go through this whole presentation with your supervisors, provide training to them as well. So again, train employees and supervisors. We want to make sure that we have drinking water, emergency response procedures. So we have plenty of drinking water, but we also know beforehand what is it we're going to do in case somebody gets sick. And then the other fourth important thing is to make sure that we have shade. Those are some important basic things that we have to have. The consequences. What are the consequences of not having those four elements available? Well, an order prohibiting use may be issued when the temperature is above 95 degrees. If you do not have enough water, shade, you have not provided training, or emergency procedures are not in place, hey, you could be subject to an order prohibiting use. If the temperature is at 80 degrees or above, but there's a critical factor putting employees in danger. For example, you have no shade available. It's 80 degrees, but there's no shade available for employees to get in out of the sun, or there's not enough water. There's not enough water for your particular number of employees that you have out there working, or they have not been trained at all. There's no kind of training. One of the regulatory agencies might come out there and issue an order prohibiting use, which means what? They can shut down your operation for that day, and the operation cannot be allowed to resume until the imminent hazard has been corrected. So either you provide shade, or you provide water, or you provide training. So let's avoid that. Let's not make that a part of our lives. Let's do the training beforehand, prepare beforehand, so we don't have to go to that level. 10 steps to beat the heat outdoors. And again, this is the most 10 the steps that I feel are if you take notes, if you're a note taker like I tend to be, I'm kind of an old school guy, this is where you'd want to take some notes.
Okay. Jose, before we get into that, just want to let everyone know that as a reminder, you can type your questions in the questions pod located at the bottom of the panel, and your questions will be answered in the order they are received. And I'm just going to go through a few questions before we get into the 10 steps.
Okay, great.
Great. The first one we've received, I think you've touched on this already, is will the presentation be made available after today? And the answer to that is yes. Both the presentation as well as other resources will be made available on demand within a week. And in addition to that, we will provide a copy of the slides as well. So first question I have here, besides that, is does sunscreen need to be provided? Or are the OSHA regulations just for internal overheating?
So, the sunscreen is not a requirement of Cal OSHA. There's nothing, or in any OSHA program that I've looked at, it's not really a requirement. So then you don't. Again, it's I think it's a case by case nature. I would ask your whatever agent. Medical provider you guys use for industrial care, ask the doctor, what do you think about a sunblocker? Should we provide that? But it's not part of a requirement at this point. And the OSHA regulations do cover internal overheating. They do. That can be for indoor as well as outdoor, and it does cover people staying hydrated. So absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Jose. Next question, is it required on the days that are above 95 degrees? Does the water need to have ice in it?
Well, here's the deal, Speaking with college or compliance officers, you know, the education I've gotten from them is that the water, and looking at the regulation, the water has to be cool and has to be temperate, you know. So again, if it's above 95 degrees, it wouldn't hurt to put some ice. Now, it doesn't have to be ice cold because it has to be temperate, it has to be cool. But if you're going to be out in a hot condition, it's not a bad idea to drop a little bit of ice in there in that igloo in the morning, in the middle of the morning, and then make sure that so that you make sure that the water stays cool. Another thing is too, I often go out to construction sites or to even agricultural sites, and I notice that they'll have the igloos in the back of the supervisor's pickup where everybody's drinking. That's great, but the igloo's out in the direct heat, so you know that water's starting to warm up. So I would encourage you as much as possible to keep those igloos in the shade. And then another big no-no is you want to make sure that you're not keeping the igloo on the ground, directly on the ground. You wanted to have it up on the high somewhere on a table somewhere, or if you're going to have it on the back of a pickup, make sure that that area is shaded, but the igloo is shaded, and that you have enough cones. And you know, for the fuel sanitation standard talks about having enough cones for everyone to drink. So you want to keep it as cool as possible and have it be as sanitary as possible.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want you to know, I took that opportunity to sip a little bit of water. I was trying to make sure that I stayed hydrated during our presentation. So 10 steps to beat the outdoor heat. So if you're, like I said, if you're a note taker like I am, you probably may want to kind of jot some of this stuff down. So 10 steps, provide drinking water. That's one of the key things. You want to make sure people have plenty of drinking water and discourage employees from drinking sodas and monster drinks and that kind of stuff. Number 2, access to shade. You want to make sure that we have shade accessible in California, but in a lot of states, other states as well, 80 degrees or more, we have to make sure that we have shade is accessible to our employees. We need to have a plan for cooling our employees down. We have to acknowledge that it's hot out here. We can't act like we're Superman or like it's not affecting us. We have to have a plan for cooling ourselves down. Another important thing for the supervisors and for lead people is to monitor the weather. We want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the weather and we acknowledge the weather and we prepare our employees for the warm weather that might be lying ahead for them. Number 5, we want to establish emergency procedures. We all know that if you've ever been to a first aid CPR class and then a couple of days later you might be in a restaurant somewhere and you see somebody choking and you go and you assist that person, boy, you feel so good that you took a class and that you had some idea of, hey, what can I do to help? That's why it's important to establish emergency procedures beforehand so we know how to what our game plan is going to be. Number 6, address acclimation changes. Some things we want to do there is that we have to acknowledge that sometimes we have to give employees that opportunity to get used to being in the work environment. We all know that if you're out doing physical work and you start out in the morning, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and you're out there as the day wears on, your body slowly adjusts to that temperature, as opposed to if you were to go out there at midday, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it bangs you, right? You know, because why? Because your body had that chance to acclimate. So we have to address acclimation changes. Number 7, we want to make sure that we have a written plan. Again, that injury and illness prevention program, it is such an important part. It's the way we do things around here. That's what our plan is, who we are and how we do things. That's what our written plan is about. Number 8, we want to make sure that our supervisors are trained. We want to be able to just off the cuff ask them questions. You know, hey, Mr. Supervisor, you know, make sure that they understand specifics of heat illness. So you want to make sure that you provide training. Number 9, we want to make sure that we train our employees as well. And then lastly, we want to look at observe for signs and acts. So again, our 10 steps for beating the heat outdoors. We're going to kind of go into these in a little bit more detail now. Okay, so provide drinking water. Drinking water must be clean. Absolutely, it has to be clean drinking water. It has to be free. You know, I've heard stories that back in the day they used to charge employees for water. I just can't imagine that. But yeah, that's one of the things we don't live in that time, in that era anymore. No, we have to make sure that the water we provide our employees is free. And it's also clean, not filled from non-potable sources. I've had employers innocently, not to be mean, but they've said, "Hey Jose, I got this really pretty stream of water that runs through my property. Would it be okay if my guys just take jugs of water and fill it up from there?" No, you can't do that. That's a no-no. It has to be from a non-potable source. It has to be clean water, cannot be contaminated. So you want to look at the containers themselves and make sure that they're clean. The water cannot be contaminated. And then we want to make sure that we have a plan. If it's an extremely hot day, and let's say that we have 10 employees working and we only have 5 gallons of water, well, that's okay if it's because again, the regulation calls for 2 gallons of water per a quart of water per employee per hour. So let's say that you have a gallon for midday till midday. Well, that's okay for the instant, but then you need to make sure that you get that water replenished. You have a plan in place to, hey, if I don't start up with enough water for a whole day, how am I at midday, or employees are drinking a lot of water, how am I going to replenish that water? So you want to have to think that one out a little bit beforehand. Provide drinking water. Locate the water containers as close to the work site as possible. Absolutely. We all know that when it's hot out there and we're working, or we're even at the amusement park or wherever we might be, we're out in the open and element, and you see that the water is kind of far away from where you're at, you might say, well, I'll wait a little bit to drink water, right? Well, employees think the same way, so if the water's far away, they're not going to drink. So because it's too much of a hassle. So you don't want to make it a hassle. You want to make it as easy as you can for that employee to drink water. So keep the water readily accessible. It's right there. It's right next to them. Move the water with the workers. Oftentimes, I refer to ag because I see a lot of ag accounts. Sometimes, they'll have the water over there at their counting table, or right where the restrooms are at, for example, nearby, and then they start to harvest, and as they're harvesting, those toilets don't follow the workers, and after a while, it's pretty far away. So I always tell people, hey, mount wherever if you got a mule or a tractor where you're hauling the equipment through, keep the water right there, located right next to where a picking table then you want to have the water on the picking table, but you move the water with the workers. Also, you want to encourage frequent drinking of water. You want to make sure employees are drinking plenty of water. Again, remind employers they should not wait until they're thirsty to drink water, and that goes for all of us. Do not wait until you're thirsty to drink that water. Make sure you're staying hydrated throughout the course of the day and throughout the course of your work periods. Access to shade. One or more areas of shade at all times. So again, you want to make sure you have enough shade for all the employees that you have working outdoors. Locate the shade as close as practical to the work site. Absolutely. Again, if it's too far away from them and it's too much of a hassle, they have to walk too far, they're not going to use the shade, and wow, then you're not complying with the regulation. So you have to keep it accessible to employees. Must not cause exposure to another health or safety hazard. So you can't put the shade next to a highway. Your cars are speeding by or something, or have it next to a big tree with loose branches that could cause particles to fall or branches to fall onto employees. No, you have to make it as safe as possible. So infeasible, you can see this photo here on the left is that shade. Utilize established procedures for providing shade. So you want to make sure you have a safe area to provide shade. I've had to shoo or remind employees, hey, get out from under that trailer. That's not a good place for you guys to take your break. I know it's cool under there, but somebody can fire up that trailer and move it or something. So again, make sure you're not creating another hazard. Provide alternate cooling measures for protection. So again, make that shade. You can see in that photo right there with that pop-up shade. You can see that shady area. So you want to make sure that that's the kind of shade we're providing employees, or some kind of alternate shading. When do we provide shade? Well, when it's below 80 degrees, when the shade does not exceed 80 degrees Fahrenheit, provide timely access to shade upon request. So even if you don't think shade is necessary, you're thinking, well, it's not necessary. It's cold. It's November. We all have jackets on. If an employee should walk up to you and say, I want shade, provide them the shade. Just give them the shade. So that's what you want to do. At above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, provide enough shade to accommodate all employees. You want to make sure that we have enough shade. So let's say we have recovery time. We have an employee who needs to take a little 5-minute break to kind of catch their breath. At the same time, we have another group of employees that are on their rest period. You want to make sure you have enough shade for those two classifications of employees. And let's say you have a third class of employee that's they're on their meal break. Well, we want to make sure that we provide enough shade for everybody on that crew. So that means that you got to have enough shade to accommodate all employees. Your plan for cooling down. Encourage employees to take cool down in the shade. Get them out and say, hey, go sit go get out of the sun. The sun is bright. Go sit down. And if I encourage them to take that cool down in the shade. Monitor employees. So if employees are on their cool down period, keep an eye on them, watch them, ask them if they're experiencing symptoms of heat illness. Hey, are you okay? Is everything all right? Do you have enough water? Don't let employees get back to work until symptoms have abated. If you see that employees kind of feeling faint, or like, oh, this is really getting to me, they're kind of fanning themselves or that kind of thing, don't let them go back to work, okay? When in doubt, start taking the appropriate first aid steps or emergency response. So, never, if sometimes we don't recognize illnesses, or we don't recognize emergency situations, and we're slow to react. Let's not be like that. Let's try to really stay on it. We see that, watch our employees, and we see, hey, they're starting to get a little sick, or say they don't look right to me, step in and do something about it. That's our obligation. So again, take appropriate first aid steps or emergency response procedures. Monitor the weather. So track the weather. There's a lot of National Weather Service has a bunch of great websites, as well as our local news organizations instruct the weather. So keep an eye on the weather. Talk about that with your supervisors. Hey, tomorrow's going to be hot. Make sure there's plenty of water. Make sure there's shade. Encourage employees to drink a lot of water and get in out of the sun. So you may want to modify the workstation, the work schedule. You may want to start coming in earlier. Increase the number of breaks and the number of water available. As much water, you may have additional water, more than what you need. Rest breaks, make sure the employees can take additional rest breaks. I've always been impressed when the times that I visited Las Vegas in the summertime, and I noticed they do all their highway and road construction at night. Yeah, absolutely, because it's just too brutal in the daytime. So that makes sense. So that's a perfect example of modifying the workstation, the work schedule, because of the results of the weather. Establish emergency procedures. Absolutely. So we have to know beforehand, what is it that we're going to do? Ensure effective communication. So we want to make sure everybody understands what our emergency procedures are, that nobody's going to mock another person for getting sick. Oh my God, that does happen, right? And so we want to make sure that's not what we're about, and that's not the culture that we tolerate in our organization. So ensure effective communication. Respond to signs and symptoms of possible heat stress. So let's not wait. Let's not kick back and say, oh, but they don't seem that bad. No, we want to act. We want to make sure that you're proactive. Supervisor, they have to have that responsibility to take immediate appropriate action. So supervisors have to be empowered and told and taught that, hey, if somebody starts feeling sick, you take immediate action. Don't wait. If indicators of a serious heat illness, implement emergency response procedures. Call 911 and call the office and get the ball rolling. Don't wait. If employees exhibiting or reporting signs and symptoms of heat should be monitored and not left alone. Absolutely. And I can tell you guys stories about that one. Guys that were feeling sick and go take a nap in the truck and they forgot all about them. Those kind of awful stuff like that. So we want to make sure that none of you folks are part of that category. If somebody says, I'm not feeling well, hey, we keep an eye on them and we don't leave them alone. On-site first aid or appropriate emergency medical response services shall be offered. So those of you that have invested in first aid and CPR classes for your supervisors and key people, boy, I applaud you. I'm applauding right now. I applaud you, because that's great. That means that you care enough about your employees that your supervisors can offer first aid or appropriate first aid medical services when necessary. So when in doubt, contacting the medical professionals, EMS, emergency medical technicians, get those guys out there, or gals. Contact emergency medical services immediately. Here's a big key: ensure clear and precise directions to the site. Absolutely, I can't tell you the number of times I've been out looking for a harvest screw somewhere, and I need to have that phone number, say exactly how do I get there, So you do the same thing, and I would encourage you, if you're on either a construction site or an agricultural site or anywhere where it's kind of remote, you want to send somebody, maybe a backup, a second or third person or trusted employee, to the highway to alert paramedics, and then direct paramedics to the specific site, because we all know sometimes if you're on a big job site, you can drive around for circles and circles like trying to find people. So we want to make sure that we have clear and precise directions to the site. Address acclimation changes. Again, some things that we need to acknowledge. Lessen the intensity and or shift length of newly hired employees' work. So if that's possible, I always encourage companies that if they're going to have people working in intense hot areas, indoor or outdoor, give maybe that first day only have them work a half day or 6 hours or whatever, but gradually let people kind of build up their resistance and get their body acclimated to the heat. Closely observe employees newly assigned to high heat areas for the first 14 days. So yeah, again, keep an eye on folks, let them build up their resistance and get their body used to the temperatures in which they'll be working. Be extra vigilant with your employees to recognize immediate symptoms. So for those new employees, again, if they're new on the job site, they've never done this kind of work, keep an eye on them. Keep an eye on them. Just kind of be extra vigilant to make sure they're okay. And then whenever possible, modify the work schedule or reschedule non-essential duties. If we don't have to do this particularly difficult task, if we don't have to dig that valve out on that particular day, or maybe we can wait a day or two. Yeah, let's modify the work schedule so we're not doing that extra heavy work on the hottest day of the year kind of a deal. We can, if you can wait a little bit, let's modify that work schedule whenever possible. It's not always possible. Develop a written plan. That's, again, getting back to who are we and how do we do things around here. Integrate effective outdoor heat illness procedures into your injury and illness prevention program. So you want to have a written plan, a written program that has all the elements as required by your local jurisdiction or your OSHA office. So keep it accessible to employees. So yeah, be transparent. You want to make sure that you're transparent with all of your employees. So it's not something, it's not a document that's up on a shelf collecting dust, but it's actually a living document. So keep it easily accessible to employees and to OSHA, and make it in a language, in English, and a language understood by the majority of your employees. So in our particular template that we have on our website, there's also a Spanish version as well. So again, you may want to modify it to make sure that all employees within your organization understand your written plan for heat. Detail how your company will provide access to water. So you want to make sure this is how we're going to provide water to our employees. This is the way that we're going to provide shade, when the temperature's above 80 degrees, and how are we going to allow employees to take their cool downs, when and how. Our plan for monitoring the weather. How are we? We're going to have little thermometers, and some of my accounts have these portable thermometers. I think they picked up at Home Depot and Lowe's. They have those available where you can monitor the weather just from your pickup, for example. So yeah, you want to make sure you have the tools in place for monitoring the weather. What happens if institute high heat procedures when it's really hot? What are we going to do? How are we going to respond? So institute high heat procedures when it's particularly hot. And then again, your plan has to discuss acclimation methods and procedures. So how are we going to acclimate our workforce? And again, it's all going to be written into your plan. We want to have it written out. So again, what do they say? An oral contract is not worth the paper it's written on. So if you don't have it in writing, you don't have it, right? So let's make sure we have it in our plan. It addresses access to water, shade and cool downs, monitoring the weather, instituting high heat procedures, and again, addressing acclimation. Also, have your plan detail how your company will train employees and supervisors. Now, how are we going to provide training to our employees? How are we going to respond to heat illnesses without delay? That's the key right there, without delay. How are we going to respond to heat illnesses? How are we going to provide first aid and emergency procedures? We want to also direct that in our program as well. And then also the importance of providing clear and precise directions to the work site, to emergency medical first responders. Again, some things that we want to make sure that we have. Training the supervisors. The best time of day or the best time of year to provide training to your supervisors is before it gets hot, So before heat stress conditions occur, make sure that if it's already hot, it's almost too late. It's not too late, but it's almost too late. So again, make sure you provide training to your supervisors before heat stress conditions occur. Heat standard requirements. Make sure you cover the regulation for your local jurisdiction. Again, so if you're in Texas or you're back east somewhere, whatever your state, if you're under a state plan, get a hold of all of the OSHA offices. Will have a consultation component to it, and contact them and say, or even get a copy of the regulation and read the regulation. I always tell people, I'm not that smart, but I do know how to read, so I just read the regulation. So again, make sure you go over the heat standard requirements with your supervisors. Review your company plan and procedures with your supervisor. There's no doubt. Teach supervisors how to monitor temperatures, and also teach supervisors how to respond to weather advisories. If it's going to be particularly hot, what are we going to do? Are we going to knock off early? Are we going to start early? Are we going to start at 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow as opposed to our normal start time? Again, supervisors need to be trained on how to address challenges that arise in the work environment caused by heat. Again, teach the supervisors the how and when to implement the plan. Also, they need to be the key people to recognizing heat illness symptoms. They need to know what those symptoms are, and they need to act. What to do if they suspect heat illness. Again, they shouldn't have to call the office. They should know what to do beforehand. So that's one of the things that we want to make sure our supervisors are trained, and also to monitor weather reports and respond to weather advisories. Those are some key things. Employees, they're another, the most important part. I mean, the supervisors are the key part, but the most important part is that this information get pushed down to all levels of the organization so that we can walk up to any of our employees and they say, and you can ask them some basic questions about heat illness and they'll know how to answer. That's how we know that that your training is being effective. So again, train employees on environmental and personal risk factors. Personal risk factors, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity. Those are conditions that could make a person more susceptible to becoming ill. So yeah, conditions like diabetes. If a person, that's why I've had people ask me, well, how about if I give my employees Gatorade? No, don't give them Gatorade. It has a lot of sugar. If you've got a person who's got diabetes, that's not a good idea. Water, good old water. But again, you want to talk about to employees about the environmental and personal risk factors that can put them more at risk for getting sick. The added burden of heat load on the body. We don't want to be in denial about heat. We want to make sure that we understand what heat is and how it affects our body. We want to understand that all employees know the company's heat illness prevention program, what it is, where it's at, and what it means. You know, so we want to make sure that employees understand the heat illness prevention program. But more importantly, we want employees to understand their right to water, their right to have water, their right to rest and cool down, and also the importance of providing first aid. And is seeking first aid. If they're not feeling well, hey, report it to the supervisor so that the supervisor can assist them, you know. And that's one of the keys that you want to, if you're a supervisor, you want to be a supervisor who's approachable. You want to be that naggy supervisor. You want to be those naggy supervisors. We want to train them to not be naggy so that employees feel comfortable coming up to them saying, hey, I need to get out of the heat. I need to take a break. So again, we want to make sure that employees are trained. Train employees on the importance of drinking plenty of water, importance of frequent small quantities of water. Again, don't wait till you're thirsty to drink water. So drink water even if you're not thirsty, you know. And this little graph that we have here up on the upper left-hand side, it shows 2 cones there. Well, 2 little cones, that's 8 ounces. We should be drinking 2 cones every 15 minutes, you know, to make sure that employees stay hydrated so that we end up drinking a quart of water in an hour. Rest in the shade, getting out of the sun, right? Watch out for one another, you know, look out for your coworkers, and then wear hats and light colored clothing and remind them about the importance of that. You know, I'm always real proud of my hat, my little Gatorator hat, a little kind of a cool hat that I have that has a ventilation on it, and it's has a wide brim on it, so it lets me just kind of cool off, and it doesn't let my head get too hot. So yeah, make sure that you provide, encourage employees to wear good hats and appropriate hats and light colored clothing. Different types of heat illnesses. We want to make sure we provide training to our employees on different types of heat illnesses, initial symptoms, you know, and then emergency symptoms, common signs and symptoms. Make sure that everybody understands it. You know, appropriate first aid that they should take. You know, and then emergency response. So make sure employees know that, hey, somebody's feeling weak or something, report it. Don't just let them flop over in front of you. Go and help them. Help them out. You know, and acknowledge that heat illness can progress rapidly. Oh, absolutely. So we want to make sure that employees understand that, and we provide training to our employees. Also, we want to make sure that employees grasp the concept and importance of methods of acclimation so that they slowly get used to the heat. We want to make sure that employees understand that. So again, the concept of importance of methods of acclimation, the importance of immediately reporting signs to the supervisor. So again, we want to be the kind of company that's transparent enough and welcoming enough that if somebody's saying, hey, I'm not feeling good, that they can report that to the supervisor without feeling like they're going to be admonished or scolded, you know, that, hey, it's okay, sit down. And then procedures for responding to heat illness so that everybody knows what we should do if somebody should become ill. Observe and act. Okay, some important things. That's number 10 of our 10 steps to beating the heat. Follow the procedures. Follow our established procedures. Designated employee invokes emergency procedures, so don't wait. If somebody feels sick, hey, get that designated employee should call 911 and provide first aid and stay with the worker, and contact 911, and again, supply precise directions to the job site so that we're exactly where's the person at. Okay, so what to do in high heat? And there's days out there when the humidity level gets really high, or it's 95 degrees or above or higher. It's those are the days that are challenging, and that's why we're all here and listening in on this stuff, is because there are days when it's just brutal out there. So what do we do on those really high heat temperatures? We have to do some extra things. Well, when the temperature exceeds 95 degrees or the humidity level is extremely high, certain industries need to do additional stuff, take some additional measures. Agriculture, construction, landscaping, just primarily folks working outdoor oil and gas extraction and transportation, they're mandated to do some extra procedures, and the procedures are as follows. Hold a pre-shift meeting on preventions. Even though you might have done a heat illness training the week before, when it's going to be hot, remind employees of tell them, and tell them some more. It's the culture, our safety culture, the way we do things around. So hold a pre-shift meeting on prevention. Remind employees of the importance of drinking plenty of water. Again, give more frequent reminders to drink water. Observe employees for alertness and signs and symptoms of heat. So talk to them, make sure they're okay. Designate one or more employees to call for emergency services. So have that plan in place, and ensure effective communication, either by visual, making sure you're keeping an eye on them, your radio, electronic, but you're keeping an eye on employees and making sure that everybody is okay on hot days. For agriculture, people working in agriculture, 95 or above, ensure employees take a 10-minute cool down every 2 hours. So again, in addition to that 10 minutes, they get another 10 minutes. So make sure they get that 10-minute cool down period for this every 2 hours at 95 degrees or above. And then they also get an additional 8 and 10 hours of work. They should have additional 10-minute break. Supervision is limited to 20 employees or fewer. So again, if you've got in agriculture, if you got a supervisor who's in charge of 20 people or 30 people, he now needs to have either a role boss or a lead person who's helping him keep an eye on people. So that's what the regulation calls for. And it also calls for a mandatory buddy system. So again, if you're going to have people that are working alone, you want to make sure, if you're going to have people working in groups, you want to make sure they're keeping an eye on one another. And I might need to go back a slide or two, but I also wanted to make sure that you guys understand the importance of effective voice communication too. So again, if you have one person who's going to be digging a trench somewhere or working on an irrigation line, you want to make sure that they have either their radio on or a cell phone, or you're able to watch them, but you want to make sure effective communication. So again, so now we've gone through the 10 steps. Now let's talk about some of the resources that we have available for our policyholders, because lo and behold, you guys are important to us, and we want to make sure that we provide you with the best resources available. So let's talk about some things that we can do that are available to you free of charge. So ICW risk website. So we do have the heat illness prevention plan in place. If you don't have one, there's actually a template out there, and it's also open to the general public. So you don't need to be an ICW policyholder to access this stuff. You can just do a word search like ICW group, go into workers' compensation, and then go into where it says safety and risk management. And there's a section there that will talk about heat illness, and it does have the heat illness prevention plan in English and in Espanol. So absolutely, check it out. There's also a heat illness training short in there as well. There's the Stay Cool flyer. that's there. The Know the Difference flyer, which is the poster that I also showed you folks a while back. So that one's in there. That's as well as the agricultural safety poster. So there are some resources available to you. Also, some of the different jurisdictions. State of Washington has some good stuff. I've gone on their website and looked at some of their stuff. It's excellent. As Oregon is as well. And so, I'm not pushing for any particular state, but there's the state programs. Hey, they have some great resources as well as the Fed OSHA. So there's additional outdoor heat on this page is information available. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but right here, this OSHA quick card. This is from the Fed OSHA. Nice little card that you can give to employees. There's also the Cal OSHA website, and you might even be able to grab some of their videos. They used to give them for free. I don't know if they still do, but they also have their PowerPoint available on the website as well. So there is some resources out there available to policyholders that you can use for providing training on this particular topic. And it is an important topic now that we're getting into the summer months, and it's anticipated that it's going to be a warm summer. So here we go. I think we've reached the end of our presentation, or my presentation, but I'll be more than happy to have any dialogue or answer any questions that anyone might have had, or something I might have left out, or something I didn't clarify. Hey, I'm more than willing to admit my errors, and so I'm more than happy to talk about it, provide any clarification that I can.
Okay, well, thank you, Jose. Great job on the presentation today. This will now begin our Q&A session. So as a reminder, you can type your questions in the questions pod located at the bottom of the panel, and your questions will be answered in the order they are received. If we don't get to all the questions, no worries. We will collect the questions and have those answers available with the on-demand recording for you. So first question I have for you, Jose, is, are cooling scarves or cooling towels encouraged for employees to wear under their helmets or around their necks?
Well, cooling scarves, they are nice. I have seen them and even used them. They're not required by any of the state plans that I know of. They're not a requirement. So, the problem is this: if you do use a cooling scarf, now you have a sanitation problem, because okay, it's great for that day, but then if you go on the next day and you put the same scarf on, now you got a sanitation problem. You could cause irritation, cause skin rashes. Who knows? So, I would encourage you, if you're going to use a cooling scarf, to make sure that you have a ways of getting that thing sanitized. So that's the whole thing, sanitation issue. So again, they're okay, but they're not necessary. It's not necessary. If you don't need to go down that road and you can avoid it, I would, because it does create another headache for you.
Okay, great. So along those same lines, the next question: how often should water jugs be disinfected?
Well, here's the deal. I tend to be an inquisitive, well, actually nosy person. So I like to look at when I'm out there on the job site. What I usually would do is just get a little towel or something and wipe off the top of the igloo, and then I'll open it up and just take a take a look and say, how clean is this thing? To see if there's any any kind of dirt or algae. And I have seen some with algae on the bottom of it, unfortunately. So I would say daily. Sanitize them as much as possible. If you can at least sanitize them daily, that'd be the best thing. If not, at least dump them out, clean them, wipe them out, and then put fresh water in it. But you want to keep those things as clean as possible. Think of it like if you had your own family members. How would you want your family members drinking out of that thing? Yes or no? Well, then that should answer that question for you. I would say daily, whenever possible.
Okay, great. Next question: if tractor drivers who are working at a job site by themselves, can they bring their own container with water and ice, or do we have to provide that for them?
I would say, again, the regulation says that the employer is responsible for providing water. So, you might have the best intentions and tell you, hey, here's your igloo, and it's your responsibility. I'll even pay for the water and I'll pay for the ice. And, you might have the best intentions, but their employees are going to say, I forgot my jug today. Now they don't have water. So I would say no. I would say that they should not bring their own igloo. They should be something that the employer provides. All materials for the job, so they should be provided by the employer. Don't count on the employees to fill up their own water jugs, that kind of stuff. No. You provide that water, and you provide that shade, and you provide that rest.
Okay, great. Well, I want to Okay, great. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending the ICW Group webinar, Beat the Heat and Keep Cool Outdoors. I would especially like to thank our presenter, Jose Gutierrez, for his presentation, and you, the audience, for participating. In about a week, you will receive an email letting you know when the on-demand recording of this webinar is available. And this will include resources as well as a copy of the slides for you to download. So this concludes today's webinar. Thank you and have a great day.